Welcome to the Bree Pod. I'm here with Devin McCormick, endurance athlete and computer scientist. Hey, Devin.
Hey, Bree, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. I'm so excited to have you on here. You have inspired me in so many ways. Just to give, I guess, our audience a bit of a, background. You and I met each other at a previous former job, and we just clicked instantly. So
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, that goes without saying, I think we both were a very different person when we first met, which is beautiful because we've got to see each other blossom into who we are today. And that's included, marriages for both of us and many, many moves, many
yep.
job changes, which is always fun to see. But I think also, to your point, when we first met, we kind of had that, instant connection, which, as I'm sure we'll talk about, is very rare for me. So, yeah, I'm very grateful for having you in my life, and I'm grateful that you asked me to be here.
Yes. So I brought you on because I felt that you have such a beautiful outlook on life, and I wanted you to share what got you into becoming an endurance athlete.
Yeah, that's a very long story with lots of ups and downs, as you will. But like I've mentioned before, when I first met you, I was not an athlete in any way, shape, or form. I think if you remember, I used to joke that running was not something I did. It wasn't something I was interested in at all. But yeah, so I guess I'll start, with my health. Way back when I was in high school, I was starting to have some problems. I won't go into detail about it, but, just random symptoms, some that were really persistent, some that were really confusing, lots of doctors. Most of it was sort of, I'd be really weak one day and then the next day I'd be fine. I'd have very varying digestive issues, which again, I won't go into detail about that, but I'm sure a lot of people can relate. And they sort of accelerated through college. And one of the things that really only resonated with each doctor or specialist that I saw is every time I got sick, I got really sick. So if I got an infection, I had big problems. And antibiotics were sort of a new problem all in of their self. I had a lot of reactions, and there's a huge list that I can't take when it comes to antibiotics. So it was sort of confusing until finally one day I got a autoimmune diagnosis. And from the people that I've met who have autoimmune issues, it's a very common story. It's inflammation in different parts of their body that causes a whole bunch of alarms to go off. And it kind of, gave me that moment of clarity that I knew something, and, it might not have been exact, but it was something that I could work with. And so that, really led into changing my life. But then I think the next big step I took is I moved out here to Burlington. So I live in Burlington, Vermont, for people who don't know me. And if anybody knows anything about Burlington, Vermont, it's a very healthy place to live. We have great access to doctors, but sort of the mindset of the people here is much different than what I was used to. So that was pretty eye-opening for me. And most specifically, with a man that I met who is now my husband, which I'm very happy to say. But yeah, his name is Gavin. He's really into fitness. So if you've ever seen a picture of him, that makes a lot of sense. He's a very fit guy. And at the time, he was doing a little thing called obstacle course racing. And for people who don't know what obstacle course racing is, there's two main ones that we did. There was Spartan and Tough Mudder. And for the first couple of years, old Devin was just like, yeah, I used to be a cheerleader in high school. I will be your number one cheerleader. I will be at every single race cheering you on, but nah, I'm good. I don't want to get dirty. I don't want to get covered in bruises. I mean, like, these races beat you up. It's a race. It's much more than just sort of a 5K. And then I just remember, watching him train and watching him put all this effort into something that got you a medal and a beer. Like, that was it. it was really inspiring, to see somebody go after something for really no end other than that self gratification. And he was a very healthy, happy person, and professionally very successful, but just so present and positive. I think if I were to give a word to Gavin, it's positive. And Bree, you know this really well because we're very good friends. But he's sort of like a light in my life. He doesn't really let me be negative for too long,
Yeah.
which I'm so endlessly thankful for. He's got that big belly laugh. But so there was one specific incident where I was like, you know what, I used to hike, and these are mountain races for clarity. You run straight up and down a mountain a bunch of times and you do obstacles in between. And he and a buddy were going up to Bolton, Vermont in the summer, and they were going to run the lift line. So this wasn't a hiking trail. This wasn't easy. This was 1 mile in 1,000 feet straight up on deadfall in, thorns and probably poison ivy and poison oak, just like rough terrain. And that's Spartan training in and of itself. It's scrambling up a mountain as fast as you can. That gives you a good simulation of what you got to do. And I had a little bit of an ego, and I'm like, yeah, I used to hike. I grew up hiking all the time. I can totally do this. And wow, I could not do that. Well, I guess I should say I did do it. It took me 45 minutes. I was in tears. It was the hardest thing physically I've ever done in my life. And I mean, I was generally an athlete as a kid. I didn't do anything really, really difficult, but I had never really pushed myself like that. And I remember, if you're climbing a mountain, you kind of like crest a hill and you're like, oh, that's the top. And then it's not the top, you're halfway. I had a lot of those moments, but I remember when I finally crested the top and I saw him standing at the top of the lift, and this crazy feeling just kind of overwhelmed me because I wanted to quit halfway up. I thought there was no way I could do this, but I kept telling myself, take another step forward. And it was up, I was taking a step up because it was so steep. But I could do it. So I'd take another step. And then I did it again. And then I did it again. And then when I finally got to the top, it was just this idea that I did it. And so in the future, I could do it again. And if I practiced, or if I, worked out a little bit more, or, lifted weights a little bit more, it would get easier. And I would need a broken leg or something really debilitating to not be able to do this again. And it was just, I think a lot of athletes have sort of been in that moment when they've just been pushed to their absolute limit. And what really did it for me is, I could only go forward. If I wanted to show my, now husband, but then boyfriend, that I could do this and not chicken out, I had to go forward. There was nothing for me down the mountain. I couldn't turn around. So I did. And I still wear a necklace to this day with the GPS coordinates to the top of that climb. And I've run there many, many times since, and I'm much faster, but it was just, it was a very profound moment. It was that, that moment that proved to me I was worth a lot more than what my mind had told me I was worth or what I could accomplish.
Wow. I feel like the first word that came to mind when you said that is like liberating and
absolutely
awakening. Like because as you were speaking prior, you were going through a lot of health things, and you're like now into this dating scene. And of course I know your background because of our friendship, but it's just I remember you prior to Gavin, and it's like for you to go up this mountain, it's just a huge experience, I feel. But obviously you're saying that, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just what a liberating moment for you, especially with all the stuff, because you were dealing with so much at that time. It's crazy.
Yeah, 100%. And I know we talked about this a little bit before, we went on the podcast, but I think what was really easy for me up until that point was to sort of use my health struggles as a crutch. It was an excuse, right? It was a reason why I didn't have to work out or why I didn't have to be a fit person. And there was so many things. I mean, if anybody listening has ever done anything, and it doesn't even have to be a sport, because, I, for full disclaimer here, I might be a runner and a bicyclist, but that doesn't have to be your thing, right? Like it could
Yeah.
be college, it could be, your job, it could be being a parent, that's hard. It's so hard. But being in that moment of, when you cross that line of doing something that's beyond what you have mentally allowed yourself to think that you're possible of doing, or you have the potential of doing, it's sort of like this strange realm. And once you're there, you don't really know what to do. And a lot of people call this the wall with running. Mile 20 of a marathon, you hit it and everything hurts and you just want to quit. And I mean, it hurts. It's like this incredible amount of pain, but once you hit it, it doesn't really get worse. It just sort of maintains. And then your mind kind of quiets a little bit. And then you're aware, actually, I'm not in as much pain as I thought I was. It's more of the reality that I've been running for 10 or 20 miles, hitting the wall, than the actual pain and discomfort that I'm feeling. And then there's this sort of euphoria of, I don't have to use these things as a crutch anymore. I don't have to listen to that voice in my head that says, you might want to be a marathoner or an ultra marathoner, or, insert, really challenging accomplishment here. But you're doing it. And it's sort of, you're breaking down those walls of the I can't, or the you can't, because I think that's really important to distinguish between, is the voice who is directing themselves at yourself. We really are our own worst enemy, and listening to those words. I mean, I still do it every single day. It's not like running has cured me of, ignoring that horrible inner voice, but it's taught me to turn around and say, shut up. I'm going to keep doing this, and having a reason that makes you want to go further than listening to those voices.
Yeah, I love that. It made me think of the time that we actually did the Spartan Sprint together.
That's
And
right. We did. Yeah, I remember that.
yes, and in my head, my voice was saying, even before, like, as you know, I have endometriosis, and actually the day of I started my monthly friend, uh, and I was giving myself excuses before I got there. I'm like, well, I can't do it. I just can't. I'm going to be in pain. I'm going to not do well. All these things came into my mind. But I was like, no, I can't do that. Like, my friend's going to be there. My husband is going. Your husband is going to be there. And then as we were running, I just loved the fact that, like, I would hear my inner voice be like, you can't do this. You're going to fail. You're going to fall. And here's Devin on the other side of me, like, you've got this. It's okay. We're going to keep going. It's okay. Like, even when I slowed down to walk, you're like, it's okay. We're going to keep going.
Right.
And I appreciate that so much, because our inner critics are so mean. They can be
They're
so
mean
mean.
and they're loud. They're so
Yes.
loud. And recognizing how loud they are, I think, is important too, because you sort of have to, where's your air horn that's louder, to tell that voice to shut up. And yeah, that was a really amazing day, because, and I want to share this story with you, because I'm not sure I ever told you this. But it's a good segue to explain how I got to the endurance
Yeah.
athletic part. So anyway, I wanted to run a Spartan sprint, which is what we did together, and it was pretty similar to the one that we did, which was hard. It was in the woods, it was cold, it was rainy, it just was a gross day. And I remember this was probably, I think this race was going to happen in August of, I don't know what year, probably 5 years ago. And Gavin had done maybe 10 of these things. Like, this was a race he was going to do in his sleep. And for people who don't know, a sprint is roughly 4.5 miles, maybe 20 something obstacles. And it's on trail. So sometimes they're on mountains, sometimes they're on trail. This was more of a flat trail. We weren't going up and down a mountain. I think it was on a farm. And I'm going to put up air quotes here for people who can't see me. I trained. right? Like I did minimal running, and I didn't have a structure to how I trained. I'd like run every couple days, like a mile, and I lifted weights occasionally. And I thought I was putting in my due diligence for this. And I was actually losing weight. I a lot of people might know this, might not know this, but I gained a significant amount of weight when I was in the middle of my medical sort of experience. And one of the biggest things that was my downfall was my diet. Horrible. I mean, addicted to soda, candy, you name it. I didn't eat well. But I also went through steroid treatment, which is just sort of wreaks havoc on the body and the metabolism, if you will. So I'm in this cloud of self-pity, and I'm like, hey, I'm actually losing weight by doing this. And then the race came before I was even ready for it. And this is what I love about something like a Spartan race or a 5K is when you sign up for it, you pay money. And young Devin didn't have a lot of money. So that day was going to come whether I was ready or not. And I think that was the biggest step in my motivation journey. And so that race came and I ran it, it was so hard. I probably walked more than 50% of this thing. I cramped multiple times, like to the point where I was on the ground begging for mustard. That's like, I guess, like an old wives' tale that helps cramps. If it's a placebo, I'll take it, right? Like it was so hard. I was covered in bruises and dirt. But all I really remember at the end of that race, I mean, I was in tears. It was like, it was a 4.5 mile race. Like that seems crazy to me now that I was so emotional, but I was showing off my bruises the next day at work. Like I was so proud of how hard that was. But just like climbing that mountain, it hit me. Okay, I did it, but I did not train well enough for this. I didn't put in any hard work. The race was 100 times harder than any day training. And it was just this wake up call that, I had to hold myself accountable. It was sort of like, no, you did not do your best work here. You did not train. You did not put in the effort that this really took. But that feeling was so good. And that idea that maybe if I, ran a little bit more or focused on weights a little bit more or actually practiced these obstacles, what could I achieve? And that question just ate me alive. So fast forward to, I think, May. So there was going to be another sprint the next calendar year. So I had about 6 months or so to get ready for this race. Once I decided, yeah, I'm going to do this again. And I put in every bit of effort that I could. I worked out 4 to 5 days a week. I started eating right. I mean, I know everyone who's lost weight says this, but it completely changed my life. It paid dividends with my digestive issues. And to be clear, I definitely still struggle to this day, but nothing compared to where I was at that point. And I didn't know it could get better. I didn't know I could feel better. And the thing about having digestive problems and autoimmune inflammatory problems is I think a lot of people suffer in silence. Working in a big office, it's kind of embarrassing to have problems like this, right? So we don't talk about them. It's hard to go to the doctor and sort of get those answers. But yeah, so anyway, the diet really shifted my focus and I was just motivated. I knew that this is where I wanted to put my efforts. So in the spring, I ran this sprint and I shaved an entire hour off my time. And it was at the same place. And all I could think was, wait a second, what if I put in more effort? I finished so fresh, compared to the sprint that I ran in the fall, I felt so much better. And so I'm like, okay, I have 6 weeks until a mountain super up in Montreal. I'm going to sign up. And I remember Gavin telling me, this was a step where he's like, I don't know if you're ready to do that. This is up and down a mountain 5 times. You're going to do 6,000 feet of elevation gain. And for those who don't know, a super is closer to the 10, 11 mile distance. I've never run a distance like that before at this point, but I didn't care. I had this hunger that was just kind of taking over me. So I ran that thing. And I remember that was the very first time, and I love my husband, but he would agree here, I kind of outperformed him in the endurance category. And I was kind of waiting for him, and he had to sit down a couple times, and he was kind of like, what's happening here? I taught you everything, joking. And then, but when we crossed that finish line, I wobbled to the car. I did not stop. I actually like forgot about the t-shirt and the medal and all that kind of stuff because I knew if I stopped, I would not be able to get back up. I was in so much pain. Um, so anyway, that night, still riding this runner's high, I had 6 weeks again until the Killington Beast. And if anybody has run Spartan, the Killington Beast is kind of known as one of the hardest beasts that you can do by being sort of this amateur athlete. And Gavin agreed to do it with me, but he had done it 2 years prior and it took him like 10 hours and he blew out his knee. Like we were in the ER the next day. It was really tough to watch. I knew it was going to be something I might not finish. And this is where sort of my ideology behind like what a challenge really means to me came from. Like I still hold this to today. A challenge is something I do not think I can accomplish. Like I am searching for my failure. I want to know where I give up. And I'm not talking about my mind, I'm talking about my body because sometimes you just got to turn your mind off and keep going. So I ran this beast and we finished it in like 8 hours. Hardest thing I've ever done. But I had that feeling again. I crossed the finish line and I thought, oh my gosh, I still have energy to burn. Like I can still keep going. And I started to make the distinction between, it's not the obstacles that I love. I'm not strong, and I'm not very big. Especially at this point, I had lost so much weight that, I'm just Devin. I can't lift, like I'm like 125 pounds. I can't lift 80 pounds as easily as, Gavin, who's, 210 and 6'5". It doesn't equate to be the same thing. And there was things like, the rope climb, I was skipping it because I was so scared I was going to fall and land on my back. And, but the running, oof, I was passing people when I was running. Like that was a feeling I just was not used to. I was just being sort of the lazy slob, not being able to accomplish anything athletically. And like, that was something I could climb faster. I could ascend faster. I was hungry. So I remember at that point, I'm like, no more Spartan for me. I'm not going to do Spartan unless it's the Killington Beast. And I trained. And I think the next year I did it with my brother-in-law, who's a personal trainer. And I got that time down to 6 hours. And he was like, change this up and you've got a little bit more here. And then the following year was, so I think that was 2017. I think 2017 was the last time I've done a Spartan, which is crazy for me to say. But that was the first year I ran as an elite. And if someone had told me I was going to run as an elite Spartan in any race, I would have told them they were absolutely crazy and they had no idea who I was. But I did. I ran as an elite. I met some of my heroes, like Spartan pros. I remember, if anyone knows Spartan, Rhea Coble, love her to pieces. She's such an inspiration. Look her up on Instagram. I was just chatting with her at the beginning of the race on the start line. And like the CBS camera just like kind of came in front of us. And I'm like, don't freak out, just play it cool. I never saw her again. She won that race, by the way. But I did it in 4 hours and 30 minutes and I came in 23rd out of the pro division. And I wasn't a pro, I was out there just gassing it as hard as I could. And I collapsed at the finish line. That was today. Like even I've run further, I've run harder. I've never been so exhausted at a finish line. And mostly because at this time, Gavin had turned into my cheerleader and he was on the, sidelines just screaming his head off what my time was and what my place was. And that there was a girl right behind me. And, so it turned into this, like, I could be a competitive athlete if I really let myself accept that challenge and go after it. And it completely changed my life. And to this day, I don't really do Spartan anymore. I don't really do Tough Mudder. But I'm chasing big endurance distances.
Yeah, and you did tell me earlier when we started that you're actually going into becoming a bicyclist. I'm sorry, I cannot say the term. A bicyclist, is that how we say it?
Yeah. Well, so a little bit of what I'm doing now. So in the fall, I ran my first marathon, which, well, let me back up a little bit because I do want to tell the story of my marathon.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I didn't mean to push that. Or
no, I completely forgot about it. But I think it's worthwhile sharing.
Yes.
because of COVID. I think if anybody is an athlete out there and you're still grinding it out because of 2020 or through 2020, um, great job. Keep going. It's interesting. I think it's either been, a complete stop for some people, or it's been the thing that motivates you. And for me, I had a little bit going into it, but I just took this time to run. So if I backtrack a little bit, after I ran that Spartan race, I knew I really wanted to chase, really, really big endurance races, like as far as my body could carry me. I wanted to figure out what that limit was. And I knew, because I had done the 10K portion of the marathon relay, and I had done over a half marathon and just training for that Spartan race. I knew that I could do a full marathon. It just kind of clicked in my head one day. My husband thought I was insane. I'm like, so many people run marathons every single day, so why not me? My voice had turned into more of an encouraging and positive voice, rather than that, you're not worth it. You're not someone who can do that. Just let the other people do it, So I signed up Christmas 2018. So 2019 Vermont City Marathon was going to be my marathon. And I was still doing my own thing, training on my own. And, taking accountability for myself. I ran myself into the ground. I didn't really follow I downloaded a training plan off of like Nike. It wasn't even structured for me. I didn't have the base going into it that I should have had. I tried to go from 0 to 60 in a day, basically. And I think, so I had an injury that I didn't know was an injury start to, show itself around April. And the end of May was the marathon. And I just ignored it. And then probably like 4 days before the marathon, I was in such denial that I wasn't injured, that I was hobbling through these runs. And then it got so bad I had to call Gavin to come pick me up because I couldn't even walk. But I'm like, I'm going to strap my knee together. I'm going to hobble through this marathon. I've trained for 5 months. I'm going to do this. And, one of the many reasons I love him as much as I do, he tried to bring me back down to earth. And he's like, all right, let's run 2 miles on the treadmill and just see how you feel. And this was his way of kind of showing me, without telling me, that if I can't run 2 miles on the treadmill in a very controlled environment, I'm not running 26.2. And he was right. I couldn't do it. And I thought it was my meniscus. It turned out that I had torn my gastrocnemius muscle, which is one of it's your calf muscle, but I had torn it right behind where it connects to the back of your knee. So I was facing a potential of having that muscle bunch up behind my ankle and needing massive surgery to kind of staple it back in place. Not a place I think any person wants to be, much less an athlete. And so this was confirmed with an MRI and a doctor 2 days before the marathon. So Devin's in this big pity party, like, I've done all this training, I've sacrificed all this time with family and friends, and I'm not going to run this marathon. And I think, I'm a very firm believer that everything happens for a reason. And my family was going to come out and celebrate the Memorial Day weekend and watch me run in this marathon. And my father still wanted to come out. And I'm like, well, that's great. Like, he lives 2 hours away. I don't get to see him very often. Sure. And so what a lot of people don't know is that day he told me he was diagnosed with cancer. The day I would have been running the marathon. And if any kid has gone through that situation with their parent, I mean, it flips your world 180. And it was sort of that moment where I was like, I'm going to take this. I am going to take this as perspective. I'm going to reflect and say, I could be in this pity party longer about, oh, poor Devin. Devin's not running a marathon. Or I could say, my father is in a much worse, I don't want to say that because it's not a comparative situation, right? But it was sort of that perspective that there are so many things that are much bigger than me, and they're much bigger than sort of what Devin wants out of the hard work. And so I made a promise to him that day. I don't even know if he remembered it or if he took it that seriously, but he was confident he was going to beat cancer. And I could tell that it took a lot for him to tell me what he was going through. And so I made him the promise as well. I said, I'm not going to let this defeat me either. We're going to get it done together. I'm going to run a marathon. You're going to beat cancer. Because if anyone knows my father, probably the hardest working human I've ever met in my life. And I'd like to think I got a little bit from him, but time will tell. So anyway, fast forward to, 2020. I'm happy to say my father has kicked cancer's butt.
Yes.
He's cancer free. He's doing fantastic. But because of COVID, I was training so hard for this marathon. I was giving it my all, really inspired by my dad and sort of that attitude he took. He lived his life every single day as if it were normal. And, if you're an injured athlete, it's so hard to do that, to have that perspective without thinking like, oh, I'm not running again. Like, when you marathon train, you've done your most right before the marathon. So getting injured right there means you're going from big 11-hour training weeks to nothing. You're sitting on the couch for months. So psychologically, that's going to mess with you. So I had to stay positive. I had to keep him at the front of my mind and just kind of follow his lead by inspiration. And then, of course, Vermont City Marathon got canceled because of COVID. And I could have let myself have another pity party, like, oh, I've done all this work and I'm not going to be able to do this. But then I realized I'm not running Vermont City Marathon to race. I'm not, for anyone who understands how fast marathoners are, I'm not doing 5-minute miles. Like, I'm not a professional. There's no money on the line. There's nothing that's really going to change my life about running the Vermont City Marathon. And by this time, I do have a coach. So I have a professional coach that sort of keeps me in line. She doesn't let me run into the ground, and she's a nutritionist as well, for women in endurance sports, which is fantastic, especially for me. And I was so fortunate that she had the same perspective, because she's a professional athlete. So her job dried up overnight when COVID hit. And she just challenged me like, all right, let's build our own. Let's do our own marathon. Why do we need to do Vermont City? And she was so right. So I sort of designed the hardest marathon I could come up with. And I ran it on the lake I grew up on back in the Adirondacks. So this thing had like 2,000 miles of elevation gain, which is like a mountain in a marathon. And I was going to run it all by myself. I was very fortunate that my family followed me on 4-wheelers and in cars and cheered me on, but it is a lot different than sort of running with 5,000 of your greatest running friends and, having a crowd. Like Vermont City Marathon has a crowd the entire way cheering your name because it's on your bib, and it's, it is a different experience. So I knew I was really going to need to dig deep mentally to get through this thing. It was going to be slow. It was going to be hard. It was going to be cold. I did it in October. But I did it. I remember, like, my brother, he's awesome. He put up a surveying tape, the orange surveying tape from a mailbox to a 4-wheeler on a dirt road. And I remember I ran into it and it wouldn't break because it was so stretchy. And he quickly whips his knife out and cuts it and goes, yay. And then handed me a bag of Doritos. I'll never forget that. He handed me a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos. But what I remember feeling at the end of that finish line is not only having my father there and getting to see his reaction that, I told him, you inspired me, this was for you. But also thinking about how I felt in that moment. And I was fine. I walked back to my house and I wasn't exhausted. I was hungry, but I had more to give. So it was just sort of that turning point where I realized, why do I run? Why do I race? And it's because I'm looking for my potential. I'm looking for, where do I start to taper out? Where do I actually get exhausted? Where's that point where I cannot take another step? And I haven't found it. So this year on the schedule, if all things, I'm still uninjured because things have been going really well. My coach really knows what she's doing. I highly recommend anybody look into getting a coach if they're facing the same things I faced. But this spring, I'm looking at 50K, which is, I think, like 32 miles and change on a mountain. And then also a 100-mile bike ride is the next
Yes.
big thing. So, and I talk about this a lot too. You know, you don't have to be into one thing. And I know that I talk about running. I am not in any way, shape, or form encouraging anybody to become a runner. It just happens to be that this is what turns my power on. It makes me feel like a strong and powerful, independent individual. But I'm adopting biking because ideally, and my biggest goal is Ironman Lake Placid.
Oh,
So
that's a good one.
I do not know how to swim. I'm just going to be 100% clear there, but I'm willing to figure it out and to see, you know, where this journey takes me. You know, am I going to do the 70.3? Am I going to do the whole thing? I want to do the whole thing, but we'll see.
That's awesome. And sorry for getting your surprise out early on that one. I
That's
completely,
okay.
I was like, wait, what am I doing? But I just think that's so awesome that you're doing that. I know, I remember back when your marathon was going on, because as you know, my family, we do the relay portion of
Mhm.
that. And we were going to be there, and I had like all these posters ready for you for that weekend. And I remember how like bummed, you were, which I could
Mhm.
understand. It's like you get so close, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm almost here. And then it's
Yep.
like it just crashed so quickly. But just how you took yourself out of that, and I mean, and to learn, such news about your dad, like at the same time as a lot of people, when the world starts to crumble, that's the time that's like, okay, I'm out, we're done.
Totally. Yeah, you spiral, right? Like you just
Yes.
the negativity is so attractive. I think that's something that I talk about a lot with people who have suffered from depression, anxiety, you know, everything 2020 has thrown at us.
Yes.
It's so easy to sort of be attracted to negativity and just, you know, and just take it all in and revel in negativity. But you can't do that if you want to move forward in life, if you want to take those baby steps. And, you know, if 2020 has taught me anything, it really taught me that like I'm in love with training. You know, I don't really need that race. I don't need a medal to prove that I'm good at something because, you know, when I cross a finish line and it's something like the one my brother built for me at the end of my own marathon, I honestly don't know what a real marathon feels like. You know, I've run a couple times that distance, but I don't know what that actually feels like. And I think there's a lot of power in that because what running has taught me, and this is why I say it doesn't have to be running, but what I think is really important to move forward in life in the direction that is right for you. And that's different for every person, but there's a lot of power in learning to enjoy spending time with yourself. And I didn't used to like that, right? Like I used to just, oh, I hated Devin. I'll be the first person to say that. You know, I would criticize how I did on a test, or I would criticize how I spoke to somebody, you know, and I still do this, right? Like we go out, I mean, in 2020, we didn't go out in public, but like, you know, you go out to a bar with a bunch of friends and then you beat yourself up for hours afterwards over a little thing that you said to somebody and wondering how they took that or how they digested that. What I mean, there's not a lot of point there, but if you really reflect on what you're doing in that moment, is you're being mean to yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no way to know how a certain person took what you said, but there is a way that you can control how or what sort of perspective you give yourself, and learning to flip that perspective and say, you know what, I'm thinking negatively about this, but why am I thinking negatively about this? And sort of moving forward with that and being able to digest that. And what I've found with ultra running, you know, I do a lot of really long runs by myself in the mountains. So, you know, sometimes I'm just going up and down a mountain over and over again. I'm not seeing anybody. I'm not with anybody. No one really wants to train with me. That's something that, you know, I just accept. So when you're sort of in that space of, you know, this is just a training run, I'm not doing this to achieve anything other than fitness or, you know, to attain that goal of a longer distance, there's no fanfare and um, there's not much to motivate you to be taking those steps. So you really have to be okay with what that voice is going to say. Because what I found is if you're sort of in this monotonous level of pain, which is what running gives us, or studying, or whatever it is that gives you that uncomfortable, oh, I just really wish I wasn't doing this right now. Those negative thoughts are so attractive. So what I was saying before, it's so attractive to be negative when you're already negative. And I've done so much thinking and self conversations that it really changed. And I don't know when, but at one point I started talking positive to myself. Running in the dark with my vest and reflectors on, and I've been out there for an hour and a half, and a car goes by, and I'm like, I wonder if they think I'm a badass, and it's not always that. Some days I'd say most days it's like, oh, I just want this to be over so I can have some hot chocolate and a piece of cake or something. But it's really being comfortable with doing something 100% for yourself and not doing it for anybody else. Because I can tell you, there's not a lot of people in my life that understand why I do this. And they don't get it, which is fine. That's not the point. The point is I feel strong and powerful. And every time I go farther, I feel stronger and more powerful, and more independent and in love with myself.
I love that. It's like you brought inner Devin and outer Devin together in a relationship. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And like you two sit together and you figure this out because we're
yes.
over it.
Yeah. Which exactly. I feel like we all need that moment because, like you're saying, the inner and the outer, and it's a lot of work that sometimes we'll run away from. We're like, nah, no, we're good. But
no, you got to do the work. You absolutely have to. And I know that we've talked about this a lot, but the more that I've done this and the more that I've sort of treated running as a sense of therapy, if you will, a way to be alone with myself and to really work through my challenges and my struggles. I mean, it's paid dividends in my personal life as well. In my career, I had a lot of doubt in the early years. So I'm a computer scientist. It's a very male dominated field. It's a very tough field. And I never went after an engineering position, for example, because if anybody's been in software engineering, the interview process can be tedious. You have to do code aptitude tests. They don't just hire you because you say you can code. They make you prove it. And it's a very long process. And I would always tell myself, well, even though I did really well in college, I got really good grades, I liked doing it. I was like, well, maybe I'm not quite good enough though. And I don't want to fail. So I'm just not going to do it. So I worked like tech support jobs. And once I started running and once I started spending more time with myself, you just, these realizations hit you that you're the only one holding you back. And through challenging myself and really pushing for new accomplishments that, I don't have to explain to anybody, I found this inner power and, I went after that job and I got it.
Yay. That's awesome.
So, it's just a job at the end of the day. It's not the biggest and baddest job in the whole wide world, but it's the one that I wanted. And I mean, it challenges me every day too. So stay challenged is, I think, like the message that I need to always hear from that. If I'm not challenged, I'm just sort of dormant. I'm not moving. But that forward momentum is really important.
Yeah. And I love how you said that, like, you were the one that kind of held yourself back before you were also the one that went after it. So what I like about that is it's funny. Not only are we our own critics, but we can be our own barriers.
100%.
To beautiful things. And by you crashing that barrier down, being like, listen up, Devin.
Yeah. And really holding Devin account. Yeah. It's like, there's two Devins, right? There's the good one and the bad one. The bad one tries to win a lot more than the good one.
Like, we're going to do this. And then I think that's the most powerful part is that you went and got it and did it. And with that being said, like, what are the misconceptions or mistakes that are made maybe with running, but like in passion in general or with the passion? for others that may not be running?
I think, and I'm going to use running because that's
Yeah, no,
my
no, that makes
language.
sense.
I think, it's getting out or doing what needs to be done when you don't want to do it. And sort of, thinking about other things as being your reason as to why you're not doing it, or excuses, making excuses. And so this is a good example that I like to think back on a lot, even though it's hard to admit. So, the man I'm married to now, when he was my boyfriend, like I said before, he's very fit and he's very passionate about his health and fitness. And when I met him, I wasn't. And I remember having a lot of negativity or jealousy, I think is the best word to use, when he was going to the gym. And it wasn't directly at him, but it was sort of the idea that, there's probably these gorgeous fit women in perfect workout outfits that are just staring at him, or like making conversation with him at the gym. And it had nothing to do with sort of my insecurity around his faithfulness to me. It was more so that, I wasn't going there. I wasn't there to know for my own truth. And I don't really know how or why, but one day it just clicked that, I was inspired by him. I wasn't mad at him for being fit because that's what I wanted to be. And it was clear as day. It was my problem. And there was nothing that he could do that could fix it for me. Because if he stopped being a fitness junkie, I wouldn't have loved him for the same reason that I was in love with him at that time. It was one of the things I loved most about him was sort of his drive. And it wasn't just for fitness. Again, he was very successful professionally. He owned a house very young. He was just so driven. And so why would I ever want him to be less driven? I needed to change what I was uncomfortable about and why I was uncomfortable going to the gym. And it was my confidence. And how do you fix your confidence, And so that really launched me into this journey of endurance sports because, I might not be the most confident person in the world. I honestly don't share very much on social media, mostly because I'm out there running. I don't spend a lot of time looking at social media. But it really had to do with, my confidence of myself and how I thought about myself. And I thought in my perfect world, I was going to become a fitness junkie and I was going to work out with him all the time. We were going to go to the gym together. I was going to wear those high-waisted yoga pants, on and on and on. And that did not happen at all. Now I wear less makeup than I think I've ever worn in my life. I probably care less about my actual appearance than I've ever cared in my life. And I never run with him. He never runs with me. I had to figure out what it was that was making me feel that way and why it was missing from my life and fix it. And I did. And I occasionally work out with him. We don't do the same things at all because he lifts really heavy weights and I don't. I'm actually pretty weak compared to what I used to be. But yeah, I just think, learning to take that perspective, take the negativity, same with learning about my father on marathon day and flipping it on its head and just saying like, this has got to be fuel or it's going to destroy me. And, throughout my childhood, throughout my young adult life, there's been so many moments where, you can have a tremendous amount of pain and you wish more than anything in the world for someone to come into your life who's experienced the same thing and understands. I think we all crave that. But the reality is that just doesn't happen. And if it does, it's a beautiful thing, but you can't expect it to. So you have to be able to take that negativity and say, this is going to be fuel for my own gain. I'm not going to do it for anybody else because that feeling comes from needing somebody else. So you have to learn to need yourself. And yeah, I figured out how to need Devin when I need it most. And so long story short, I see a lot of people give up because they are just too exhausted or they're too sore, or last time they ran, they got an injury, or it's really late. I don't want to go out in the dark, or I don't want to get up early. It's really cold out in the morning. I don't want to do it. But I tell you with 100% honesty, I have never finished a run and regretted doing it. And there's been many times when I didn't want to run, but I did it anyway, and it has completely changed my day around. I mean, it's 10 times more effective than just sort of blasting happy music when you're really sad. There's a lot to be said in taking back your power.
And I just love that. Taking back your power. What a beautiful thing. So with all of the what we have spoken about, let's take you back to young Devin. What would now present Devin say to young Devin before, well, obviously to young Devin? What would Devin say to young Devin?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think the very first thing that I would say, and this isn't to like key into anything negative that is specific, but I would tell her there's light at the end of the tunnel. I had an idea of who I wanted Devin to be, and that didn't really, for no reason in particular that's negative or bad or anything like that. I didn't really see that version of me around me. I knew I had to find it somehow, or that it was going to be different than what I was used to. I wanted to go into a field that I didn't know anybody who went to school for computer science. I knew people distantly, but not very personally. I had no idea what kind of challenge I was in for. And the same thing with running, and what I think is really interesting is for anybody that knows anything about computer science, one of my specialties is databasing. That was my last job before I moved into more the software test engineer is what I actually am now. I was a database analyst. And I used to say, like when I was in college, I wasn't a runner. I hated running with every fiber of my being, but I also hated MySQL, which is the universal language for databasing for Microsoft. And then professionally, I became a MySQL databaser and an endurance runner. So I think there's a lot of humor there. I said it for a reason, whether I knew what it was or not back then. It's because those are the things that really challenged me. And I think that's something I really want to share with anybody who is curious about running is I wasn't a high school runner. I wasn't a collegiate runner. I absolutely plan on running a 100-mile race someday. And that's purely because of what I found in myself, because I felt like it was a challenge I had to chase down. I had to conquer it. And there's so much to find if you chase that challenge, even if you fail. And there are many things that I've considered challenges and I have actually failed. But the one thing that I know for certain is every time I have failed, I have learned 10 times more than the times that I succeeded. So when I talk about that elite Spartan race, when I was running next to these professional gods, is what I always say, like I couldn't believe that I was there, but I also never believed that I would be there. So it just kind of, it's easy to say it just kind of happened. But I took the baby steps when I could, and that's as simple as, going to school for computer science and working hard for that assignment, not even like the final exam, but taking that baby step and putting the effort in, or going out for a run every morning, doing the strength exercises that I need to do to stay healthy and injury free. Eating the right foods and making sure I'm nourishing my body and hydrating properly so that when I do go out for that run, I'm not sabotaging it by not eating properly, not eating enough, not drinking enough, drinking too much alcohol. There's so many things in the equation of life that we have control over that are choices, and they're micro choices, not macro choices. And if we make those choices wrong, then we only have ourselves to hold accountable. So young Devin was aware that, I'm going to make so many mistakes, and what mistake is the right mistake. And I was so afraid of making a mistake. I was so driven that I got to go to school. I have to get good grades. I have to get a good job. I have to prove that, I'm smart enough. I'm good enough. I'm driven enough. But along the way, I found out that, there's a big difference between the life that you tell yourself is right for you and the life that turns out is right for you. And like I mentioned, I'm doing something completely different than I thought I would ever do. I actually thought I'd live in a city. I was determined to live in Seattle. That was like a big thing for me. And a little bit still, I'm still kind of obsessed with the idea. But my husband and I just bought a house further out of Burlington. And part of me is like, did we go far enough? Should we be in the mountains? Yeah. So, you have to embrace the change. You have to embrace what you want in that moment. And another point that I really want to make is this is something I hear in sport all the time, especially, when I started biking, is sort of that notion of, oh, I didn't know you did that. Oh, I didn't know you were into that. Like that mentality of, you can't take on a new hobby or you can't find something new to be good at. I don't think I'm wired that way. I'm the person who I was in every club I could possibly be in. I was in band, chorus, like you name it. If I could do it, I was going to do it. And I think I'm just wired that way. And so I embraced that. And if it's not ultra running in 5 years and it's, I don't know, competitive chess, which never I will, but if it is, so be it. I'm going to bend to what life throws at me and do what keeps me happy and keeps me self-fulfilled and take care of Devin, because self-care, I think it's really big in sort of pop culture right now, but self-care is not, it's not doing what just feels good, right? Like it's running on the days that I feel like I really don't want to do it, but I know doing that run is going to make my marathon easier or more successful, right? Or it's eating the right amount of leafy greens in my diet that I need when all I want is a cheeseburger and french fries. That's really the self-care and adjusting to sort of how life bends, and that there's no endpoint that we belong to is really that idea. So there's always light at the end of the tunnel, even if it's not the light that you thought it would be.
Yeah, I love that because I've seen that even in my own life as well, that there's so many things I've done that I was like, wait, I was never do that. No. But something that you said there about being put in a box, like only like, oh, you do this too, you do that. I think that was intriguing because a little unknown fact maybe to some, but some that do know you also sing. You used to sing.
Oh, yeah. And you want to know what's really funny about that? My husband actually made a comment the other day. I used to be so like, I've always loved singing. And I never really like, I always was really shy about it and I would hide it and like be afraid to sing in front of people. And ever since, like, I've kind of like given up the idea that like I've got to be, if I'm going to sing ever, it's got to be perfect, right?
Mhm.
Like that idea of perfection, somehow I've given that up. And now like I mean, I will sing what I'm doing when I'm doing it around the house. And sometimes I sing in like a really goofy, like caricature type voice, or other times like I'm actually putting effort into it. I mean, I don't sing nearly as much as I used to, and I certainly like I used to play piano. I never do that. I mean, that poor piano is collecting dust. But I just don't care, or that's not the term that I want to use, because of course I care. I love singing, but it just like I don't hold it against myself. I don't hold myself to this ridiculous expectation of, every time I open my mouth, I have to be perfect. I'm flawed. I'm a human. Like, I'm going to say stupid stuff. I'm going to sing horribly. I'm going to trip and fall on my face in front of traffic on ice. Totally did that the other day. I'm going to get injured and not be able to run for 6 months. Like, that kind of stuff is part of the process. And if you can't laugh at it and have humility in it, then why? I don't know. It works you into a place that, like I was saying before, you only create for yourself.
Yeah.
You're holding yourself back. You just have to live a little bit more authentically and be willing to just be, whatever comes your way. And that can be in the form of a new hobby, that can be in the form of, singing as you're doing the dishes and like singing about the cup that you're washing, whatever comes your way.
Embracing the imperfections.
Totally.
I love that. Yeah. I think that's a great way to look at it, is to embrace your imperfections, that we don't have to be perfectionists and we don't have to control every single detail of life. Life
Yeah.
is going to give us something that we didn't expect, and it's worth it to go for it. So
Hmm.
thank you for sharing that that advice that you give young Devin, because I feel like there's a lot of us that are still in the position of young Devin, and being like, what I don't like, I have these barriers on myself. How do I
Hmm.
break these barriers? So thank you for sharing how you've broken these barriers and how you continue to do so. And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
celebrate your falls and such.
I was going to say, yeah. And I think what's key there is, it never ends. you know I'm still a perfectionist, I'm still a control freak, I'm not perfect ever, I never will be, but I've accepted that fact. I've accepted that those barriers are going to shift, they're going to change. Like some days, especially race morning, oof, that mean Devin is so loud. It's so, it's an emotional roller coaster, no matter what it is, whether it's, your professional life, your personal life. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So with that being said, I know that you're not very social media type, but I hope that you do give us little tidbits here and there with Instagram and such, because for people that would like to follow your journey, if you do post, where would they go? Like what is your handles for your platforms?
It's so funny that you asked me that question because I have to look. I don't know.
That's
Yes, but
funny.
it's one of those like innocent things that I'm just inherently bad at. And like I said, honestly, I am bad at social media because I'm too busy doing other things, but I would like to be a little bit better. But yeah, my handle is Devin J. McCormick on Instagram. That's probably my primary um, social media. But for anyone who's in the running community or athletic community, whatever that may be, I'm Devin McCormick on Strava. So you can always follow me there. I probably am more active on Strava since I do something every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. But yeah, I've got a couple fun things. I just did a big mountain hike with my husband. A few weeks ago, I tried to run by all the houses that had the most Christmas decorations. So I post stuff like that, and, I'm not trying to like break any barriers or like set any PRs per se, but you can just follow my training and sort of see what it looks like to be an endurance athlete in training.
Yes. Well, I don't have Strava, but I'm just going to get it so I can follow, because I think that you have such a beautiful story and journey. And I mean, obviously, I follow you in other ways because we're friends, but I'm going to follow your Strava and check you out and see where you're going, because you just light us up. And I hope that you come back onto the podcast and give a check in the future.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Maybe after I accomplish the next step,
Yeah.
whatever that might be, we'll see what I can come up with.
Yes, that would be awesome. We'll definitely have you back here. I say we, me and myself will have you back here. Um, so thank you for coming on. I appreciate it so much. You have, like I said, you are such a beautiful soul. Thank you so much. So before I end, I love giving affirmations. So if you also want to participate, you can. Basically, we pick between the number 1 and 3. Keep it to yourself for now, and then I will read out the affirmations that come with that number, and you can let us know at the end which one you chose. So for those of you that chose number 1, your affirmation is, I am a survivor. For those of you that chose number 2, your affirmation is I am fearless, which this one was special for you, Devin. And number 3, for those of you that chose 3, your affirmation is every day, in every way, I am becoming better and better. So which one did you choose?
I chose number 2.
Oh my gosh. And that one was so, you know that inside thing there. So that's awesome that you chose 2. So with all of this, you are loved, you are worthy, and you are cherished, and I am proud of all of you. Until next time on the Bree Pod. Bye. Thanks for
Bye,
coming.
Bree. Thank you.